going to talk to you about something that has yet to happen in large part, and two things that we're doing in our lodge related to visitations. As Gerb mentioned, we just had a visitation with North Star, and that was pretty momentous for us for a couple different reasons. It's been, Ted could probably check me on this, but it's about 10 years ago, I think, that we had mutual recognition of the jurisdictions. So up until about 10, 12 years ago, the grant... Was it? Yeah, we didn't have a full recognition of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Michigan, and this is true throughout the country. There were jurisdictions that were going through this process. But now the Grand Lodge of Michigan recognizes Prince Hall as another Grand Lodge, and they're very closely related. There's still some things that have to be done. If you want to visit a Prince Hall Lodge, you have to be sort of invited into it. But one thing that I've always wanted to do in that whole time was to have a visitation between a Blue Lodge here and North Star, since they meet in the building. It's like two people that have known each other for a long time and lived next door to each other, or even in the same house, but never really gotten together for a meal. So what we did is we started talking to their lodge about as far back as February about the idea of having them come into our lodge on a night that we were doing a degree. We decided to do it the night we were doing the second degree, or the Fellowcraft degree, because there were some special things that we do as part of that ceremony. We thought they might enjoy it. So letters were exchanged. There's a lot of Masonic formality. I'll tell you a little bit more about Masonic formality with some of the other visitations that we're planning, because they involve lodges outside of the state of Michigan, which opens up a whole process. But we exchanged letters to each other expressing the interest of our lodge, having their lodge visit us. They expressed positively back to us. We sort of exchanged emissaries and worked out that last Thursday was when we were going to get together. And it was a huge meeting. If anyone was there, we filled the lodge up and had really solid sidelines, and we put together a really nice banquet afterwards, and it was good. It was just a good vibe, and something that we hope that is either reciprocated or repeated. Either we visit North Star at some point in the future, or maybe we have them come back in 2014. And what's been happening along the same time is there are 3 visitations that I've always wanted to see happen with my lodge, and one of them involves, actually almost all of them involve our predecessor lodge. For those of you that don't know, in the early 2000s, Malta Lodge, which was the Friday night lodge, merged with Doric Lodge, which was the Thursday night lodge, to make the current Doric Lodge. Malta had an amazing tradition with a lodge in Paterson, Ontario, where they would exchange fraternal visitations. Paterson would come here, Malta would go there, and vice versa, and it would continue for a long time. And they did some amazing stuff, including doing a Masonic degree in the gypsum mines underneath the city. And one past master told me that it was the only time he's ever worn long johns underneath his tuxedo, because everything is kind of a certain temperature down there. And we have some pictures of that. But it was a really long-standing tradition. What I'm actually holding in my hand is the traveling trophy from that visitation, and it has 2 panels on it. I'll pass this around. One is for Malta Lodge visits to Paterson Lodge, which started in 1975, and I won't tell you what year I was born, but it was really close to that. So this goes back the life of my time. And there's some names on here that a lot of people might recognize: Clay Ziderhook, Ed Kavanaugh, Bill Crothers, Rob Clawwaiter, Mark Baldwin, Bill Minch, all masters on our side, and then next to them were the masters of Paterson Lodge. On the opposite side is Paterson Lodge coming here to Malta, which started in '76, and some of the same kind of names are on there: Clawwaiter, Earl Bills, Perschbacher, Tom Mitchell, lots of different people. This is in our possession because the last visitation was the one in which Malta took possession of this, and a lot happened. Malta was sort of on the back end of its life cycle as a lodge, and as was Paterson. And so both lodges about the same time underwent mergers. And there is a lodge in Paterson, Ontario now that is still Paterson Lodge that is sort of seen a resurgence, just like the lodge that Malta merged into. So several years we've wanted to do this. Finally got off of our rear end, so to speak, and started working on it. Now what it involves, if 2 lodges want to do a visitation, especially across Masonic jurisdictions, across Grand Lodges, there's a lot of permissions that need to be set into place. You know, we basically had to ask the Grand Lodge of Michigan for permission to speak to this lodge in Canada, because they are outside of our jurisdiction, and there's a long-standing process for how this works. What we've been really lucky with is we were granted permission, and in order to do that, we ask the Grand Lodge, and they in turn contact the other Grand Lodge and say a lodge in our jurisdiction wants to talk to a lodge in your jurisdiction. It's very formulaic, and it's very set out. There's a process for it. We were lucky enough recently to gain, it was just right around summertime, gain permission to communicate openly between the two lodges. So the two Grand Lodges said, we'd love to see you work in a direction of reestablishing this connection, and please continue communicating. And as we continue to communicate, we'll eventually reach a point where the visitation will happen, and then that will be a whole other series of communications between Grand Lodges to get that approved. What we're going to do is we're going to go to Patterson, and our goal is to go there next year and do a visitation with them. And we're in the early stages of communicating that. We're communicating those ideas with them right now about what that would involve, and the idea being that we would have them return the following year and restart the several years that this trophy represents. So I'll pass that around so you can see it.
Thank you.
And it's a pretty impressive gavel when you get into it. That started us on a road of talking about what other visitations would we like to go and do. And there's something that we have in our vault, also, if you will, a relic from Malta Lodge. It's a really beautiful carved box that includes a set of working tools within it. And there's a plaque on here that says, presented to Malta Lodge from Golden Rule Lodge number 726, AF and AM of Chicago, Illinois, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, June 22nd, 1935. So when you find a relic like this, and you're lucky enough to have, I'll pass this around too, it's not very fragile, but just be careful with it, the items in it are loose. When you find an item like this, one thing that you do is, one thing that we're lucky to have, most lodges are, is have a really good set of minutes. And this is the bound volume of Malta Lodge's minutes from 1932 to 1938, inclusive. And you can tell it was a pretty busy 6-year period. And one thing that we're really lucky about, Malta had a secretary for about 20 years that was a very eloquent minutes writer. From a historian standpoint, this is a wonderful set of minutes. Doric had a secretary who was a wonderful man who had descended, I didn't know him personally, but had descended from our first master. And he was a very efficient secretary, and he was very brief in his minutes. So we have years of minutes that are just kind of like, the lodge opened and it closed, and like that, and that's all it says. But what I did is I went to this book and looked up June 22nd, 1935 in it. And I find that the lodge officers, this is a Saturday here in Grand Rapids, they opened up a special communication for the purpose of entertaining the officers and members of Golden Rule 726 from Chicago. The visiting members arrived on their own train here on Saturday afternoon. They were shown around the city, and then at 6:30 p.m. they were assembled here in this building where there was a banquet in their honor. And then afterwards, they were conducted up to the amphitheater. So they did this degree work up in the amphitheater. And that was, even though the first floor blue room was pretty large, it was probably because of the number of people that were there that they conducted it there. And the Malta Lodge officers opened Lodge, and then they vacated their chairs for the Golden Rule officers, who sat and actually conferred the degree. So they conferred the degree as it was done in Chicago for the benefit of one of our candidates. And that candidate was Robert V. Twining. To tell you how busy Lodge was back then, if you look the day before on Friday, which was their regular meeting night, Malta did a Master Mason degree for 5 guys. But they also examined Robert Twining for his Master Mason degree. So the next day, after doing a Master Mason degree for 5 guys, Chicago came up and did one for this candidate. The only thing that's missing here is there's nothing in the prior minutes that explain the connection. And I looked at the names, and I can't understand exactly what the connection was between the two lodges. No doubt somebody from Chicago or somebody from Grand Rapids, and they built the relationship. So what I kind of presented to the officers of the lodge earlier this year is 3 visitations. You've heard about the first one, which is Canada. The second one would be in 2015, and it would be to make contact through the Grand Lodge of Michigan and the Grand Lodge of Illinois with Golden Rule Lodge, which I did learn through a little online investigating no longer exists. It's merged into another lodge, which is still down in the Chicago area. So what we just did is did the same thing we did with Canada. We wrote to the Grand Lodge of Michigan and the Grand Secretary, requested permission to communicate with that lodge. Came back a little differently than Canada. The Grand Lodge of Illinois would like us to follow the normal decorum, so that means that all of our communications will go from our secretary secretary to the grand secretary so that he can give it to their grand secretary so he can give it to that lodge. And that's okay. It's 2015, so we have time to communicate that way. It's no problem, you know. And I also understand because, you know, the grand lodges do need to be able to know about what's going on between lodges from different jurisdictions. But we did get that permission, so as soon as I get a little free time, I'm drafting one of the first letters that we're going to send directly to their lodge, and it'll have a picture of the working tools, and it'll have a copy of the minutes from that day, and hopefully they're going to respond favorably that they'd like to talk to us about having us come down there. And we've even talked about taking the train down there because that's how they came up here. So we might take a group down there, make a weekend of it in Chicago, and do a visitation. So that's 2 of 3. The 3 of 3, the last visitation, and we're still waiting for word back from the Grand Lodge in Michigan on this, would be in 2016. And I belong to 2 lodges, or 3 if you count York here, but my other lodge is in Washington, D.C., and I've always wanted to take Doric and take a degree and go to Washington, D.C. and visit that lodge. And if you've ever been in D.C., it's a fascinating Grand Lodge. It's different, you know, it's not a state, but it has its own Grand Lodge. Relatively small because it's just within the city, and a very international Grand Lodge at that. There are a couple of lodges there that are chartered in foreign languages. There's an Iranian expatriate lodge. There's a couple lodges that are that speak Portuguese, and it's a really fascinating place. And every lodge there has history that just kind of amazes you. One of the prominent members of my lodge was John Philip Sousa. So every year they have a John Philip Sousa Day. The Marine Corps band, the entire Marine Corps band, comes to Lodge and performs, and they celebrate John Philip Sousa. And a lot of the lodges out there own artifacts that were, you know, either belonged to some of the founding fathers. A couple of the lodge jewels and the Grand Lodge jewel were made by Paul Revere. So it's just a really amazing jurisdiction. So what we're waiting on is final approval from the DC and Michigan Grand Lodge to communicate with my lodge out there, Hiram Tacoma 10. And the plan would be to go out there, take our degree team, if we could get all the approvals for that, do a degree, and then really make a Masonic trip out of it, go to the House of the Temple, which is the Scottish Rite headquarters for the Southern jurisdiction. It's in DC, and then also go to Alexandria and see the George Washington National Masonic Memorial. What we're hoping for is we can get that discussion going soon enough that we can set a date now, and our membership can start thinking about their travel plans 2 years out, which would allow us to take a really strong contingent. Whether we're really hoping that the Canada trip creates reciprocity, whether or not the Chicago trip and the Washington, D.C. trip create return visits to our jurisdiction, we're not sure yet. We'll let those lodges determine that. But we'd like to travel down to Chicago and do degree work and present them that set of working tools that they gave us in the 30s as a gift to them for that visitation. So those are 3 things that we're working on, a 3-year plan as far as visitations outside of our jurisdiction. We have one last thing that I'd like to share with you that we're in the very early stages of and doing a lot of lifting over the next 2 months on. In talking with the incoming master, Mike Smith of Doric Lodge, we were talking about our degree work, and what happened, actually Thursday was sort of a test of what we'd like to do. We have on the calendar 9 degrees next year that we will do, Enter Apprentices, Fellow Craft, Master Masons. And it's our intention, and we're communicating with lodges right now, to turn every single one of those degrees in a visitation to this building. So we are going to select 9 lodges and invite them to be a part of each and every one of our degrees. So every degree that Doric does next year would be a visitation from another lodge coming in and having time with us. And we have some ideas. We definitely want to have a visitation with Grand Rapids Lodge here in the building. There's a lodge in Ann Arbor that we're very interested in having a visitation with that we've kind of talked back and forth about in the past. We'd like to find maybe another lodge in the Detroit area that can make a trip over for maybe one of the shorter nights. And then we're looking at lodges that are in the outlying area around the temple. You know, many brothers that we know, brothers in this room, from some of those lodges, but each degree that we do next year would be a visitation. So we would have brothers come in, share the degree experience with us, have a banquet with us afterwards, and we're hoping that maybe that creates a series of visitations between our lodges and other lodges that are out there. Joan mentioned something earlier, right before I came up. She mentioned Kalamazoo Anchor, which is a very long-standing visitation that we've had that goes back more than 100 years. Its only pause was during, I think, the height of World War I. We didn't do a visitation 1 year. Otherwise, we've had a long-standing relationship where we go back and forth. In fact, my fellow craft degree about 14 years ago was done by Kalamazoo Anchor with Jerry Miller on the organ in the 6th floor Blue Room. So it's an old and special part of masonry that still goes on, but I don't think lodges, and we didn't think that we were taking advantage of it enough. And that's why we want to do these 3 visitations out into other jurisdictions, and then also do a series of visitations next year just to sort of build the bond that we have with some of the lodges that are around us. So that's what we're working towards. If you've never been to a visitation, I'd really recommend that you come to one of the ones that we're doing next year. They're a great time. The other lodge comes in. Certainly the lodges from our jurisdiction here will probably be involved in some part of sharing the degree work with us that night. Whether they will confer it or we will confer it, we'll sort of sort that out. But there'll be a banquet afterwards, some toasting, and we're working right now on items like a keepsake that we will present, along on par with the working tools that we have here from Chicago, a keepsake that we would present to each of those lodges to memorialize their visitation to us. So that's what we're working on, and that's what we're going towards. I could talk more about visitations or any of these visitations. Does anybody have any questions before I go off in a couple directions? Or Canada, and there's a mic back here, so we can do the talk show thing and get you on the video. It's being recorded, so we'll share this I-12 visit with people that couldn't be here. Canada's going to be very interesting. Their tradition of coming here to visit us usually involved a stop off at the Detroit Masonic Temple on their way home. So they always sort of made a trip out of it, came to see us, went back to Canada. What we're hoping to do is, in a lot of these visitations, we're trying not to put any burden at all on the lodge that we're going to participate with. So we're offering to them, regardless of what the cycle was, that we will come to Canada for the first time and bring work over there, provided the Grand Lodges approve it. And it's very interesting because their lodge is in sort of a resurgence as well post-merger. So they're excited to have us, and they have shared with their membership that we're talking about this, and we're looking forward to doing that. And then when they come back, we really want to make it a big to-do. People are already talking that we want to do something on par with the gypsum mines, if not greater. So that's what we'll be shooting for with them. Did you have a question, brother? You got a microphone in your hand, or?
No,
he's just holding it? Okay.
Yeah, sir.
What we're hoping to do with Chicago is the same thing, travel down there, maybe make a weekend trip out of it, and do some shopping and look around Chicago a bit. And then Washington, D.C., I already mentioned, will be sort of a multi-day trip, which is a little more involved. We're trying to think of ways that we can make the experience for the local lodges coming to visit us more interesting as well. We might do some location degree work, provided we can get the permission to move the charter or do that sort of thing temporarily. We might include an outdoor degree next year. Talked about doing a degree maybe on a riverboat and doing some Masonic activities like that. So it wouldn't necessarily all be within our lodge. But it's in a time when people were a bit more mobile, or if they were leaving a populated place and moving out west, there was a lot of transitory qualities to your Masonic membership where you would go and visit. And that also gave rise to lodges that had a relationship, maybe if a member moved to another lodge, which if I had to make a real educated guess, that's probably what happened in the Chicago visitation, is there was some member in either one of those lodges that came to the other one, and that's what created it. But that sort of led to these visitations, which is it's a fun time. The two lodges coming together, when a Canadian lodge visits a lodge, we actually put the flag of Canada up with our flag, because in a combined way. And in fact, there's a little piece in a ceremony, and I'm not betraying any secret here, where you say a flag of our country. And the reason that sometimes people say that is because that would be in a combined session where you have multiple flags up there, so it wouldn't just be the flag, it would be the flag of our country. So there's little nuances and pleasantries like that. One thing that I found interesting in the Prince Hall visitation is we didn't have too much time to talk about the mechanics of the visitation, or didn't spend too much time talking about how things would go. But you can always tell if someone is from a place where maybe their words or their ritual is slightly different, because they see a lot of things very similar in the ritual that you do, either for the opening or for the degree. But they also notice slight differences, and maybe they even do different signs or different things like that. And I saw a little bit of that on the sidelines. It wasn't anything bad, but I could tell that everybody in the room was doing it one way, and then about 16 guys were doing it the other way. And that's actually one of the neat things about a visitation, because it does show you there's a great deal of commonality between our rituals, mainly because of what they have descended from. That there was a time when ritual had these major points that were all the same, but its exact delivery was different until probably like about 140 years ago, when a few people started to standardize the ritual in lectures, and they became very similar. But as two systems develop, like the Prince Hall Grand Lodge and the Michigan Grand Lodge, they develop slightly different ways of doing things. And that's also an interesting part of the visitation, because you learn that about them, and you also realize the common experience you have sharing the ritual, but also some of the slight differences. So that's what we're working on. We'll be publishing that more and more as we go forward. So as we start to firm up who's going to visit us and when. We have the degree day set. We just don't have the lodges plugged in yet. And also we have a brother here who was a candidate for that degree. And I guarantee you that in our lodge, in my time, in the 14 years I've been in, there's never been a larger sideline than there was for your degree. So you had a particularly special experience with that. Ted, did you have something? You reached for the microphone.
Well, just one thing, Rick. Great ideas. I mean, they're really amazing. I was there that night when Prince Hall was there. I know quite a few of the guys from North Star. Some of them, I found this interesting when they introduced themselves, that didn't give their Grand Lodge titles.
Right.
There was a past Grand Master there.
We knew that too. He didn't want to be introduced.
There was a Grand Lecturer there.
Yep.
And they never said those titles. They only gave the titles as what they were in their lodge, which I thought was quite interesting and quite humble. And they're great guys, and you know, I know about 3 or 4 of them through my journeys. And just one thing, so it's come up when you mentioned about Prince Hall, the recognition. It's not, I think you said it's not total recognition. And there's a lot of people who have asked that question. And the reason why it's not a full recognition is Prince Hall did not want that. Because Prince Hall does not allow plural memberships or dual memberships at all. So their fear was that if there was a full recognition, they would have people from Prince Hall move over to our Grand Lodge and join our lodges. One of the reasons why is because our lodges are a lot less expensive than a Prince Hall Lodge. Prince Hall lodges are very expensive to join, and they pay dues monthly in their lodges. So they're very restrictive in who joins. Excuse me. So that's one of the issues. And also, I don't know where you've seen it or not, but the southern jurisdiction of Scottish Rite has just recognized Prince Hall also. So that's a big milestone, the southern jurisdiction recognizing Prince Hall. But it was a great night, and you know, if you're looking for another lodge to do a visitation, you know, my old lodge is in Jersey, you know, Mozart, so, which actually was a German-speaking lodge when it started in New Jersey, and all the ritual was done in German. And after every meeting, we'd have Limburger cheese sandwiches.
With a little onion and a little mustard.
Yeah. They had other stuff too, but you always knew when those were there. And they would always have a pork and sauerkraut dinner over the German Manicore Hall in Camden, New Jersey. So it's another lodge that I know I've been recently keeping up with, is doing well also back there. And I'm now an honorary past Grand Master in New Jersey, so if you're thinking about another lodge.
Connections run deep. We'll give you a letter if you can hand it to the Grand Master.
All right. Thank you.
Ted made a real interesting point. It's been a while since we achieved the status that we have right now between the two Grand Lodges, but it was real significant to some of us. This isn't the first time a Prince Hall Lodge has visited a free and accepted Michigan Grand Lodge, or Michigan Lodge affiliated with Michigan Grand Lodge, but it's the first time around here, which was very, very big for us that moment. And the past Grand Master that Ted was talking about is Wes Jones, who a lot of us knew through Scottish Rite originally. And he even said to me a little later that night, he's like, this was really significant. We'd like to see this continue. So we're excited about where it will take us. And that's really the two parts of this. The first part is actually doing the visitation. And that's an event in itself, and just kind of getting all that together and getting everyone arranged and invited. The second part is what relationship goes forward between the two lodges and the members in that lodge, and that really is where the echoes of the event itself come in. And that's what we're really curious about, what will play out for us as we continue to do these visitations, or set up these visitations outside of our jurisdiction, but also the ones that we're going to do next year. We're looking to do some real creative stuff with it, and that's what we're going for. So I'll get that calendar out and to the High 12 officers so they know about it, and I'll make sure everyone has advance notice that we're doing it, and you'd all be welcome there as part of that. So with that, if there are any other questions? Yes, Joe.
We do that with, my Eastern Star chapter does that with Martha chapter here.
Okay. That you do a visitation with each other?
We haven't actually been to theirs because they haven't invited us, but they come to our things We do they don't do refreshments after the meetings, but we do it for them once in a while. But they come to our other things. In fact, where the Grand Matron is from here.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, when Paul Robinson was Grand Master of Prince-Hall, it was my year. And Walt Wheeler made the comment that the first time he thinks he knows that he can think of that two Grand Masters from two separate jurisdictions
We're seated in the same place.
The Sun's Temple.
Yeah.
And the Grand Matron also was shown here too.
I'd also put out a plug, if you happen to be active in a lodge that's in our area, let me know if you might have some interest in that, and we'll reach out to your officers and talk about it, because we have not finalized the list of who we're going to try and do visitations with next year, and they'll be happening throughout the year, so we have some time to set them up. So if you're interested in maybe connecting with our lodge through a visitation, let us know.
But their Eastern Star Grand chapter is entirely different than ours.
Is it?
I had a lady that I knew that worked at a nursing home, and she'd been worthy matron, I think, probably 6 or 7 years in a row. But their grand chapter is different than ours. I don't need that. They can't hear me.
Joan was just saying that their Eastern Star Grand Chapter is considerably different than the Grand Chapter of Michigan that they've experienced. I hope that I will be able to give you a report on how this is going, and at some point I'll share with you whether we've gotten anywhere with Chicago and Washington, D.C. With Washington, D.C., in some ways I could contact my own lodge and speak to them loosely, but to make sure that this is done properly, the lodge has to pursue that communication through the Grand Lodge as it should. So that's how we'll do it.